My name's Catherine Eve. I'm one of the directors at the Centre for Leadership Performance, and one of the programmes that we run on behalf of young people is Cumbria Future Leaders, which we set up. This is going in 2019. We started some focus groups to try and understand how we could best support young people as they transition from in education through to either further education or into employment. And so what we got was a network idea where we could actually help people to connect to advice, information, opportunities, and the things that they're interested in. So what part of what we offer is a series of events like this one, and we're very much informed by what young people are interested in. So about 4 months ago, we were canvassing a group of 16 to 18-year-olds about the kind of things that they were interested in career-wise. And we got a lot of interest in environmental or green careers. So that's why we've put this evening on. So we're very grateful for the speakers who've joined us. It's a delight to have you here, and thank you very much for spending time with us. It's an opportunity for you to share a little bit about your career and obviously why you chose the environmental sector. And then we're going to hear from each of you, and at the end we'll have the opportunity for a Q&As. What I'd like to do is introduce our first speaker, who is Elspeth. Elspeth joins us from Go Low Carbon. She can tell you a little bit more about the organisation, so I'll hand over to her.
Perfect, thank you, Catherine. I have a couple of slides, not many, but I'll share my screen anyway. Let's see. We all good? Can we see this?
Yeah, we can.
Perfect, ideal. So hi, thank you for that introduction. I'm Elspeth and I work for Go Low Carbon. We're an environmental consultancy and we're based in Carlisle, if anyone is local to that area. What is a carbon consultant? Goes by a couple of names, maybe sustainability consultant, carbon footprint consultant also works. Essentially, it's my job to go into businesses of all types as well, and work out their carbon footprint for them, work out a plan, work out how they can reduce their carbon footprint within their business, and then hopefully set some really ambitious targets so they can meet net zero by whatever they choose, whichever industry they're in. We work with a massive range of industries. So some of my clients at the moment, for example, we've got hotels, we've got quarries. It's a huge mix of people. So it's really exciting. I've got just a snippet of basically my career so far, which isn't very long, but I feel like I've packed quite a lot into a short amount of time. And I've done loads of other little bits in between, but this is a kind of broad overview of how I've taken my career. So I started with an undergraduate degree at Nottingham Trent University. I didn't know I wanted to go into environmental science. I started with a really broad degree, biological sciences. And as I went further into university, I discovered it's something I wanted to do. And I specialised in ecology and environmental management. I took a placement year and ended up working there for a lot longer for a company called Laureus. They go by Eco Campus because they run this scheme. So if you're in higher, further education, some colleges local to Cumbria, I know Carlisle College is part of Eco Campus. And in that job, I went into universities and I would help them create environmental management plans, help them engage with students, help them engage with staff, and essentially help them make a plan, just like I do now in my current role, but just exclusively for universities. Once I graduated, I moved into renewable energy. So I worked for Bulb for a long time, looking at renewable technology, which is really exciting. So part of my job was looking into solar, looking into different renewable technologies. And that was all super, super interesting. I decided that I would do a postgraduate degree. So I moved up to Glasgow, which is where I am now. I work from home, which is lovely. And I went to the University of Glasgow and I studied food security, which is like sustainable agriculture. And that led me to my current role. at Go Low Carbon. So like I said, I live in Scotland, but I'm from Cumbria, and I was really passionate about working for a Cumbrian company. So I chose Go Low Carbon, and that's how I landed my current role. So I spend a lot of my time kind of coming back and forth on the train from Glasgow down to Carlisle. So the main reason that we're all here today is to talk about environmental leadership. And I've just got one slide about some little points that I wanted to cover about that. So all those photos that you can see on the right are from the COP26 March. I was in Glasgow for that, which was really cool, really awesome. And the point I really wanted to make about what environmental leadership means to me is all of those people that you can see in those photos, I took those 2 photos at the bottom, is they all don't work exclusively in environmental jobs, I'm sure. They're all leaders in their own way because they all turned up. I'm sure we've got a massive mix of people if you were to interview all those people in that photo and to ask them where they work, but they're leaders because they showed up. This on the other side, this cycle, essentially this is what I go into businesses with, and we ask them to do the following things in order to measure their footprint and then also make sure they're communicating what they're doing as a business. So the first thing we ask them to do is to commit, make some decisions based on everything, all of the knowledge that they know so far, make some ambitious targets, look at where their industry is, what they can do to really get to net zero, reduce their carbon footprint. The next portion is to measure their carbon footprint, really look at what they're doing. And once they know that, they can change their behavior and they can bring action within their business. Then, most importantly, and I think one of the most important things you can then do is communicate exactly what you're doing. Like I said, I work with a really wide range of businesses, some of which are really known for working within the environmental space. So it's so important for people to communicate and create some intersectionality. Environmentalism is for everybody. And then we repeat that cycle. We keep going. We learn new information all the time, and we add this to the cycle that we already have. And my top tip really is this cycle, even though I use it for businesses, everybody can use this in daily life. You can use it just within your family. You can use it within higher or further education, wherever you are at the moment. You could go into groups of people that are important to you, that you already have a rapport with, that will listen, and you can make those small changes and small commitments. Environmental jobs, and we've got such a range here today, which is awesome. I think it's really important to note that you don't exclusively have to work in an environmental company or an environmental institution. If you're passionate about working within the environmental space, but you're unsure, that's really exciting. If you've got other hobbies that you can intersectionally mix, I think that's one of the greatest things you can do at the moment. I have friends that work within the fashion industry as sustainability consultants. I've got friends who work for sports clubs, and they make sure that the sports club, the football stadium, is using renewable energy. You can add environment leadership into any role that you go into. So if you're thinking about careers, it's a really fun time to think where you can add environmental leadership into whatever space that you go into. Thanks.
Thank you, Elspeth. I don't know if you could see, it's when you've got your slides up, it's hard to see everybody's image, isn't it? But I was doing some real nodding along there, just some of the things, and just asking myself, what is it that I could do? What is it that if I believe in something, that idea of actually doing something about it. I think the other thing, we're going to have time for questions later, because I've actually got a couple now myself. Curious to know, how you end up working with people like a mine, which actually you wouldn't see necessarily as an environmentally friendly sector. So I will save my question for later. But thank you very much. Okay, so our second speaker this evening is Sarah Williams. So Sarah joins us from the University of Cumbria. She's a senior lecturer in leadership and sustainability. And so hand over to you, Sarah.
Unmute my mic is always a good start. Thank you very much, Catherine. And thank you, Elspeth. That was just fantastic. And I couldn't agree more with all the stuff you were saying there about environmental leadership. Really, really good start. Yes, I'm a senior lecturer in leadership and sustainability at the University of Cumbria. My teaching role is quite different from the teaching I've done before, where I've taught on lots of different sustainability courses. Here I just work on one specific master's module, which is about ethics, responsibility and sustainability. And the students are all adult learners, but they can be of any age. And in the last 2.5 years, personally, I've worked with over 1,000 senior or aspiring leaders from over 180 countries around the world. And it's just been phenomenal for someone who wants to engage others with environment and sustainability. It's just been such a brilliant opportunity to really talk with some amazing people and make a difference with them. My teaching about the environment actually starts by exploring our own values. Values are about what's important to us. And I was talking with Catherine a bit before we all started about this. They help us to filter the information that we hear and to frame the way that we think about the world, to make sense of it. And then they motivate us then to action. And this really links with how we think about the environment and how we care about it. You know, thinking about what the environment means to us is going to influence what we then do in order to engage with it. And perhaps you can think yourselves about perhaps what the environment means to you and why it means that to you. For some, for example, the environment has its own value and should be protected and cared for, you know, because it's special in its own right. Whereas for others, the environment only matters because it affects what we can do. And in a way, no one approach is right or better than the other, but I think it can be helpful to understand why an issue is important to us. And sometimes why people are disagreeing with us, or perhaps why we're disagreeing with them. And I think a lot of that comes down to values. So because we've got students from so many different countries and so many different perspectives, we start off thinking about values so we can make our differences explicit. And the teaching then uses the Sustainable Development Goals to help business leaders assess the impact of their organisation on people, planet and prosperity, and what they can do to improve on this. So we'll look at, excuse me, how they can reduce their negative impacts and make a more positive contribution to their communities. And I have to say, working as a teacher, working with these students is an honour. It really is. It's quite humbling to see how determined these students are, given that most are working full time and many are using education to lift themselves and often their communities out of poverty. And of course, many of them are doing this in the context of a global pandemic, and many will have experience of personal experience of war or economic, social, economic disruption. For me, working with them is constantly learning and being inspired and challenged to be innovative and creative. So we're always learning from each other, which is just brilliant. But I know from the feedback that we get from the students that what we do really makes a difference to what they can do and what they feel empowered to do and who they feel they are. And that's incredibly rewarding. So for my career journey, well, I've been teaching since 2009 in various roles, but I never meant to be a teacher. In fact, I never wanted to be a teacher, and actually I actively avoided it. Everyone kept saying, teacher, teacher. It was like, no. But then around about 2011, I attended a retirement conference for one of my undergraduate university lecturers. where her students were presenting on what they'd achieved as a result of her influence and her teaching and support over the years. And I realised that actually this was a way that I could make a contribution both to people's lives and to the planet, because the environment's always been a passion for me. I was vegetarian by the time I was 11, at a time when if you went out for dinner and said, oh, I'm vegetarian, they said, oh, chicken pie, will that do? And I was vegetarian because, I couldn't bear the thought of killing another life. And I was also campaigning for the World Wildlife Fund by that time as well, and presenting a home slideshow to my family with information from the BBC Wildlife on 2 programme about the need to protect elephants from extinction. So the teaching bit was always going to be there. A few years later, my first degree was environmental studies, but that was at a time when there were only 2 such degrees offered in the UK, and very few jobs related to the environment at the end of it. And it's fantastic to be reminded by Elspeth, but actually it's very different now, and it needs to be, because there's a real and growing need for people with an interest in the environment and the skills in all parts of society and business and organisations and communities to be able to make change now. As a global society, we are desperate for people with commitment and the ability to solve the problems, which, quite frankly, my generation has left you, even though we knew better at the time. After finishing my first degree, I didn't know what to do, and I ended up drifting into publishing and working on business-to-business journals that included, believe it or not, going to abattoirs and intensive farms and all the things I found really difficult with the beliefs that I had. And I remember having this eureka moment when I asked myself what on earth I was doing, and shouldn't I be working on an environmental magazine? But then I realised that if I did that, I'd just be preaching to the converted, and that where I was, I had this opportunity to reach those that I believed needed to change. So I made this conscious decision to learn as much as I could while I had access to these things that someone with my beliefs wouldn't normally see, and then to try and work within business, work within the system to help those in business do less harm. I believe as well, I suppose, that wherever I am and whatever role I'm in, that I need to trust that I'm there and where I'm meant to be, and that I'm there to do my best and help others and learn. And actually, I think that's kind of worked out. And it's sort of led me into different roles where I've followed my heart and my passion. And that's been a bit of a roller coaster at times. I've worked with individuals completely unrelated to a business context or the environment, but where I've needed to provide support and mentoring and kindness where it was needed. All of which, it turns out, are actually quite important skills for being a teacher. And then I moved into roles where I was working with business to help business to become more green and more sustainable by facilitating training and management development. And actually, it turned out that that was quite useful for what I'm doing now as well. In order to be my best, I continue to study alongside work. Firstly, with the Open University, taking a postgraduate certificate, then a diploma, and then a master's. And all of it seemed to really support the work that I was doing. It was almost like having a mentor working alongside me. I remember, for example, arranging an event for volunteering week with about 20 local partners. And the unit I was studying was talking about exactly that, how to arrange, promote and fund events. Moving on to about 2007, I was working with business and starting to question how we could engage business with climate change, because all of the work we were doing just seemed like a reinvention of the wheel. We were making small steps, try to improve efficiency, use fewer resources. But, it was clear that if climate change was going to be as bad as the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was starting to conclude, that we'd really need to engage businesses in a much deeper and more radical way and really start to think about doing business differently? And I raised that question as part of a conference presentation to business, where I was then approached by these academics from the Open University who said, that's a really good question. Why don't you apply for a doctoral scholarship, and then we'll see if we can answer those questions together. So they funded me for 4 years to research how we could engage businesses more deeply with climate change. And as part of that, I had my first teaching role, where I taught on the first year of their environmental degree. And I soon realised that actually teaching is a fantastic opportunity to support, develop and bring out the best, both in myself and in others. And it's helped me to reach my potential. And now I can be part of helping other people to reach their potential in the same way that people, sometimes you get those key people in your life at different times, where people have been that for me. Now I get the chance to be that for other people. Never really knowing who it is in my class might be that person who needed that kind word or that extra support, or to hear that idea that they're now able to take forward. So what does leadership look like to me? If you watch programs like the BBC Apprentice or see business leaders talking on TV, you might think leadership is all about competing with each other, that it's just about how much money you can make, how well you can blag an answer, and that it's shallow and often corrupt and just about power. And I think that's a real shame, because actually that's the opposite to real leadership. Leaders need to be authentic. You need to be yourself. You need to be honest, to be genuine, to be trustworthy. You need to know yourself, and you need to stay true to yourself. You need to follow your heart and your passion as well as your logic. And you need to be kind to yourself and to others, not just because you might meet them on the way up as well as the way down, but because they're as valid as human beings as you are, and because they're also trying to know themselves and be their best. So leadership is about taking responsibility. It's about doing the right things, and it's about helping others to be the best they can be. And Elspeth's absolutely right. We're all leaders when it comes to the environment, because whether positively or negatively, we're all showing our example and others are following it. For example, most of us are engaged with social media and have conversations with people at home and at work, and don't realise how much influence we have with those conversations. And most of us are setting an example through our behaviour, again, whether we're aware of that or not. And to be a leader then means being consistent in all those things, to set an example and let your actions speak louder than your words, but for your words to be consistent with your values and your actions as well. So when you see posts on social media that are negative about the need to care for the environment, how can you respond to suggest otherwise? Similarly with your family and your friends, how can you remind people that the environment is important? Does that mean that you need to do more learning, perhaps about a particular issue, so that you have the information and the knowledge you need to answer those questions? Or can you just be speaking from your heart, knowing that actually these things really matter? How can you look at the negative impact that you have through your own daily actions in order to reduce that negativity and move it towards a more positive contribution? How can you extend your thoughts of care from yourself to your friends and family to the environment, so that you are actively caring for nature, for wildlife, birds, bees, trees, not just because actually our survival depends on them, but also because they have their own intrinsic value as well. So finally, my career path, it's been meandering, but trusting I've been in the right place at the right time. I can look back and see that all of those things have led me now to where I am now. So if I trust now that I'm in the right place, and if I continue to do my best and give my best, then hopefully the next stage will also be the right place for me as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I just thought it deserved a little bit of a pause as well, because there was so much to take in. Thank you. Again, I've got a couple of questions, and I'm hoping that as we go along, our young people on the call are kind of thinking about what they would like to ask, and delighted to be able to get the opportunity to do that later on. But yeah, to cover so much, that thought about leadership, to think about business, which I completely agree. I think that we are only starting to engage with business, and I'd be delighted actually at the end if the young people on the call would also, what do you think? How can we engage business? Because a lot of the thinking that we've done already, or the actions we've taken already, maybe haven't got us as far as we would like to. So it'd be really good to hear from you what your thoughts are in terms of how we could probably make more progress. Okay, thank you. So what I'd like to do now is hand over to Heather. So Heather joins us. She works for Eric Wright Group, which I only know actually a very little amount about. So I'm sure that Heather will be able to tell you a bit more, and how her role works within the Eric Wright Group, and how she decided to use that and kind of think about environmental aspects of her career. Hand over to Heather.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, so my name's Heather. I work for the Eric Wright Group as the environmental manager. So within the Eric Wright Group, we've got several different sort of umbrellas that we work under. So we have a construction sector, so doing big projects like building apartment blocks, hotels, care homes, things like that. And then we also have a house building sector who are mainly focused on sort of small projects, building bungalows aimed at sort of the over 55s, that sort of thing. We also have a civil engineering division, so they work on bridges, roads, railway, all that sort of thing. And then we have a water sector who work on projects within the water industry, supporting companies like United Utilities, Yorkshire Water, Welsh Water, supporting them with all kinds of different projects for them. We also have a facilities management division. So they manage and maintain various properties across the Northwest. So that our clients for those include people like the NHS, Northwest Fire and Rescue Service, various different clients like that, school academy trusts, managing all their buildings for them. And then sort of the last umbrella that we cover is our Maple Grove division. So they manage and maintain our property portfolio. So they will often buy up property or land and then pass that over to construction for them to develop. And then once the construction is complete, Maple Grove will develop and maintain that portfolio. So the company is based mostly just in the Northwest, kind of loosely within the Northwest, so anywhere from sort of Carlisle down to Stoke and across towards York and into West Yorkshire. So we cover quite a broad area. One of the interesting things about us is we're owned by the Eric Wright Charitable Trust, so all the profits that the company make either get reinvested back into the business or they're passed on to the trust for them to then distribute to various charities across the Northwest. Often working quite closely with a lot of local-based charities, community-based charities, that sort of thing. And we also have a partnership with Preston College, which the trust sponsors with equipment and bursaries to get people into construction and sort of similar related careers. So my role within all that as the environmental manager, I sort of have two sides to my job. I have an operational side and then I have a strategy side. So in terms of the operational side, that's sort of more of the day-to-day job. That's what I do most of the time. So that's going out to the sites, supporting them with advice, any help that they needed in terms of environmental. So that can be how they're storing their waste, how they can reduce waste, any planning conditions that they need to meet, any help they need with pollution prevention, things like that, particularly where we've got environmentally sensitive sites where we're working sort of near water courses, or we've got old broadleaf trees that we need to protect, or protected species, anything like that. I also sort of go out to the sites and do initial sort of hazard identifications, environmental risk assessments for them, and help them to put the control measures in place. things like that. And then similar to what Elspeth was talking about before, a lot of data capture is involved as well, to try and monitor our environmental impact so that we can then try to reduce it, particularly with the waste that we're producing, because obviously some of our projects are extremely large, so we're producing hundreds and thousands of tons of waste. Then we want to try and get that as low as possible, to try and minimise our environmental impact. So then on the other side of things, the strategy side, that's where the net zero stuff comes in. So this is becoming really important for particularly the construction sector. I'm within the business. I mainly support the construction side of things. I do work across all the different business units, but mainly working with construction. So for them, it's obviously really important, because a lot of our emissions come from the built environment sector, heating, lighting, our buildings. So it's really important that we try and reduce that as much as we can. So at the moment, that's sort of getting off the ground. We've set a target to try and become net zero by 2030, which obviously is not that long away. So we've got quite a lot of work to do very quickly to get into that, to get to that target. So at the moment, we're sort of identifying, we're doing a lot of work on data capture to try and improve the different data captures that we have. And from our initial sort of investigations, we've identified the areas that we know we need to work on, to reduce our carbon footprint. So they're mainly based around our gas and electric use for a lot of our facilities management businesses, our diesel use, because obviously when we're on the construction sites, we don't always have an electricity supply. So a lot of it is coming off a generator. So we're just using diesel all the time, which is producing a lot of carbon emissions. And then other areas are sort of like business mileage, people travelling for business, commuting. We're trying to reduce all these different aspects. And as I said before, waste, we've got a lot, particularly our construction projects do produce a lot of waste, just because of the nature of the builds. So all of those are key areas that we've identified that we need to reduce our carbon emissions. So sort of at the moment, we're sort of researching and looking into ways that we can actually reduce those, and trying to think of solutions that work to reduce the carbon emissions, but will actually also work operationally for the guys on the ground, because we don't want to hamper them. We still want them to be able to get on with their jobs, and deliver the project at the end of the day, because that's what we're being paid to do. So it is quite a challenge getting that balance between profitability and the business, and making sure that we can minimise our environmental impact as low as we can. So yeah, it's a challenge, but hopefully we'll get there at some point. So in terms of my career path, I've only actually been working with Eric Wright since July, so I'm still quite new. And this is my first job in the construction sector, so it's been a bit of a learning curve, a lot to learn. So I did environmental science at the University of Liverpool. That was just sort of a combination of my A-level, so I did biology, chemistry and geography for A-level, so environmental science just combined all of those together for me, and they were just topics that I was interested in, that I enjoyed studying, and I just had sort of an additional interest in the environment as well. When I was very young, I was interested in animals, and so the environmental side just sort of grew from that, the interest in the animals and then protecting their habitats, and then sort of appreciating the environment itself. That all grew from that and led me to the environmental science degree. And then out of university, I got a job as a quality and environmental administrator with a company called Future Industrial Services, which is a hazardous waste disposal company. So obviously, again, very, very important to on the environmental side, trying to sort of take that hazardous waste and turn it into non-hazardous waste. So I worked there for 2 years as an administrator. Then I moved up to quality and environmental manager, sort of working on the systems side of things. And trying to see how we could reduce the environmental impact. And then from there, I moved into Eric Wright, obviously mostly supporting the construction sector last year. And yeah, I've been there since July, so still trying to learn some of the aspects of construction, but really enjoying it so far. It's very varied, very different day to day, and particularly depending on which aspect of the job I'm looking at, whether I'm looking at strategy or operational. So yeah, it's very interesting, and it is a challenge, particularly on the strategy side. But it's a good challenge, and it's a nice project to get involved in and work with. So in terms of leadership, obviously, as I was saying before, a lot of the challenges that we've got around sort of profitability, trying to reduce environmental impact, but still deliver what we need to do. That's obviously one of the big sort of challenges, and how we need to try and lead by example, really, to show how we can achieve that sort of that model of trying to get lower impact but still deliver what the client wants at the end of the day. Other sort of things that we sort of know we need to do in terms of leadership, a big one is communication. It's really important, particularly with our business, because we work within all the different sectors with construction, civil engineering, facilities management. Getting that communication between all the different business units and getting everyone working together, that is really important for us to make sure that we can lead our environmental message, and to make sure we've got everyone on the same page and everyone working to the same goal, which can be, again, a challenge, because not everyone wants to work together. People can be quite protective of their business area, but yeah, that is something we are trying to work on. We're trying to keep things really open in terms of what we're trying to achieve environmentally across the business and get everyone working on the same page. Another thing we try to do is try and just keep people informed. So all of our new starters in the company have some environmental training, just to give them the basics around, pollution prevention, waste disposal, and then the carbon side, how you can try and reduce your carbon footprint. So all new starters go through that. And we're just sort of trying to catch up with everyone else now to make sure everyone's got that same level of awareness and background training, and to making sure that environmentally everyone knows something, and we try and sort of keep things at the right level, so everyone can understand what we're trying to tell them and how it can relate to their job, their daily life, and even their home life, not just their work, how it can apply to work and home for them. And the final thing sort of we try and do is just lead by example, really, within our environmental department. It's quite a small department in terms of the size of the company, so we employ about 750 people. So there's 7 of us within our quality and environmental team, mainly just 2 of us working on the environmental side. So it's we're quite a small team, but we try and do our best to lead by example. Not having unnecessary face-to-face meetings, using Zoom wherever we can to try and reduce our mileage, moving on to electric cars, and all of our fleet moving in that direction. So yeah, just trying to do as best we can and educate those that are working with us, and try and get everyone on board and on the same page. So thank you very much, Catherine.
No, thank you, Heather. Oh, that yeah, I love psychology, which is what I studied, but yeah, I'm actually starting to think I might start to retrain. And actually, maybe this is what you're talking about, and your role is maybe start part of this breakthrough, that we're talking about trying to get businesses engaged. The fact that there is an environmental manager's role in a construction company, that in itself is I hope, is a sign of that.
It is. I don't think it's maybe not unusual, but it's not what you would automatically think of when you think of a construction company, like Elspeth was saying with some of her clients. It's not really what you would think of with a construction company having an environmental side to it. So it is something a little bit different, and it is, a career that you can think about environmentally in a different sector that you wouldn't automatically think of.
Absolutely, and yeah, hopefully a sign of that opening of minds to things, which is part of what you've all talked about so far. How do you actually engage others in that change?
Yes,
Thank you. Just actually spotted, I'd asked a question about this environmental science degree, which is probably, I'll put that on my wish list next. But yeah, it actually, Claire in the audience is thinking about doing that at Lancaster. So perhaps we'll get a chance to chat about that later.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Heather. Okay, so just handing over to our next speaker, we're now joined by Ciara Armstrong, and Ciara works for the Environmental Agency. Ciara, did you have a couple of slides? Is that something that you wanted to share?
I do have some slides just to run through as a bit of an aid, really, for me. So I'll just share my screen.
That's great. And if you just want to start by introducing yourself, because although I've got a sort of awareness of the Environmental Agency, and I certainly know where one of the offices is based, it's an opportunity for you to tell us a little bit more about yourself and about them.
I will do. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Sorry, just bear with me. So you should be able to see it now.
Yeah, we can. Thank you.
Great. I just need to access the button to present the little
The one I use is down at the bottom on the next to where you're at the bottom. Yeah, there.
Yes, there we go. So my name's Kira Armstrong and I work for the Environment Agency. I've been with them for over 15 years. I'll come on to my career path, but first of all, I wanted to just give you a whistle-stop tour of what the Environment Agency is. So we basically exist to make the environment better for people and wildlife. So we cover the whole of England. We're divided into 14 distinct areas. I am based in Cumbria, Lancashire. We don't cover Scotland, that's the Scottish Environment Protection Agency. We don't cover Wales, that's the Natural Resources Wales. And we report into DEFRA. So that's the branch of the government, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. And if you're interested in environmental careers working for the government, you might want to check out the list of different branches of DEFRA, because with 33, there's so many different specialisms that you could go into. Yeah, it's quite a big pool of options. I wanted to include this slide because two reasons. It's really important that we see role models and female role models in environmental fields. And we're lucky enough to have, of our two DEFRA ministers, we have Tamara Finkelstein as one of them. So she's one of the DEFRA ministers, so she has a government oversight into the work of the Environment Agency. But closer to us is Emma Howard-Boyd. So she is the chair of our board of directors, and she works alongside our chief executive, James Bevan. And I wanted to mention these people because they, to me, have been, in my time with the agency, they've been the greatest leaders that we have had. And one of the reasons that they're great is that they really do show empathy and kindness to their staff. They really have the ability to connect with people. Both of them don't shy away from sharing personal insights, whether that's about their home life or whether their past careers. So it really helps staff to connect to them on a one-to-one basis because they show the more human side of them rather than just being dictatorial leaders. So it's just something that I wanted to mention. And I think to fight the environmental causes, you really need diplomacy skills. So I think something that I'll keep coming back to is just a tip really, that if you want to work in environmental fields, I would say really fine tune your ability to engage others, because some of the fights that you have to have for environmental issues, you need to win over people, you need to put strong business cases forward, and that takes good communication and engagement skills. So some of the roles that exist within the Environment Agency, so some of them there, but it's a vast list. We've got planners and geographers, ecologists, biologists, project managers, surveyors, environmental scientists, coast and flood risk engineers. But I've also got a list because it's a long list. We have nuclear regulators, we have team leaders, we have administrators, we have lawyers specialising in environmental laws and regulations. So it really is quite a vast list of roles that you can fulfill. Some of the different ways that you can enter into the Environment Agency job-wise, other than going the usual route of applying to jobs, that you see online, we have academic internships, we have academic industry placements, we have apprenticeships, and then we have graduate engineer training programs. So that's just some of the entry-level routes that you can take. I won't read out the words, but I'll leave them on screen just for a moment. It's not absolutely necessary to go in via those routes or to come from an educational background with an environmental aspect. I actually started at the Environment Agency as a temp. I just joined for a month while I was saving up to go travelling again, and all these years later I'm still there. It really is an investor in people. So for me, I've managed to gain promotions by putting myself out there and applying for these roles and taking a chance, but also utilising the training that's on offer. So I've done a diploma in PR and marketing while I've been at the agency, but there's a whole range of different qualifications you can do while in work placement. So my role, I'm classed as an engagement specialist. So in a nutshell, I help my colleagues engage the outside world and their fellow colleagues in environmental issues and the work of the Environment Agency. So it's all about getting our messages out there, but not in a one-way push the messages out. It's about creating a conversation. So some of my tasks would be, providing that specialist advice to my colleagues. We arrange events and meetings with professional partners like local authorities or fellow regulators. Sometimes we develop partnerships with organisations like Rivers Trusts, or we engage communities about sites. So say if you have a community that's flooded, it's our role to help our staff engage and make sure that the communities know what's happening in terms of future flood resilience. We edit documents to put them into plain English. It's really important that if you are describing complex environmental issues, that you make that information accessible to all. We lead on internal communications, so we're making sure that all our staff, of which there are 10,000, we just make sure that they have access to information that they need to fulfil their roles. We also arrange site visits for VIPs, so we get quite a lot of VIPs such as DEFRA ministers. We get quite a lot in Cumbria because we flood a lot. We also have lots of droughts, and we've also got a large part of the UK's nuclear industry, so we're very popular with ministers. We run local, regional and national consultations. So for instance, if we are permitting a nuclear site, it's really important that we ask the public and our partners for their opinion, because it helps inform our decisions. So we also gather insights about stakeholders, and this really just helps us target our efforts and make sure that that two-way line of communication is open. And we help colleagues access partnerships. We have a finite pot of funding, so it's really important that we work in partnership with others so that we can access funding. We also have a lot of expertise and evidence in-house, but it's really important that we make sure that we're accessing the most up-to-date data and specialisms. So we help our colleagues make sure that they're accessing those outside resources. In terms of leadership, we have a culture, and this culture has been developed by the agency but shared with each and every member of staff, and we're helped to make sure that we embody that culture. And I just thought it might be useful to run through them point by point. The yes if one is really important. We go into any kind of discussion or any work with external partners with a yes if mindset. So that's about finding, hopefully, and it's not always possible, but a mutually beneficial agreement about the environment. So we can't go onto a farmer's land and say you must put a flood defence in there, because that might not be the best solution for him and his needs in terms of being able to farm that land. So we try to find something that's a mutually beneficial arrangement and can get the best possible result for the environment. So the think big, act early, be visible. That's about leading by being innovative. So try not to just stick in the ways that things have been done before. You know, don't use that as excuses. That's the way we've always done it. Try to think on a much bigger perspective. Rise to the challenge, be proactive, seize the day, lead by example, and most importantly, like one of my fellow speakers mentioned earlier, communicate and get your messages out there. And in some ways, these days, with all the information that we have access to and all the social media, you'd think that that's easier, but it's not, because there's so much information out there. You really need to get your voice heard, and sometimes that's quite difficult in such a crowded market. And when you're fighting the corner of the environment and there's so many other demands such as economic, it's really hard to get your voice heard. But just really do make sure that you're as visible as possible, and try to be creative in that. Seek partnership, show leadership. So that's about being a strong leader. Really does have a willingness and ability to work with others. You can achieve so much more by working in partnership, and that's proven on a daily basis at the Environment Agency. You know, you really do need to recognise how much can be achieved through respectful, productive partnerships, and it's about finding common ground to try and win over hearts and minds. Focus on outcomes, not processes. This one was developed because the Environment Agency was seen by some as being quite stuck in our ways. We had a process for each and everything, and we really had to stick to that. But now we try to just be respectful of rules, be respectful of regulation, ways of working and process, but recognise that there's other ways to do things. So just always have your eye on the prize, and as a leader, you know, take others with you on that journey and just keep focused on that outcome and try to be innovative to get there. The one team, support and trust each other. This is really about building up a network of allies, which is so important to surround yourself with. Not necessarily like-minded people, because you can't always do that, but real allies that can understand what you're trying to achieve. People that you can learn from, people that you can teach, create that strong unit where possible, and that way you can make a greater impact. Embrace difference. This is more important than ever. I think the more diverse a group of people you can have around you, the more diverse range of experiences you have, the more diverse pot of information you can dip into, the greater depth and breadth of knowledge that you have. And that really helps in terms of being a leader. It helps you innovate, because it just gets your mind going off in so many different directions, which for me is so important. And the stay safe and grow, this is about well-being, investing in your own well-being and the well-being of others, and really thinking about your personal development. You know, the environment and how much we know about it and how much we can change in the future, and how we do that is changing so fast that, you know, you just need to keep learning. And, you know, life is a journey of learning, and you'll never know all that you need to know. And that's what keeps it interesting. So yeah, keep yourself safe, keep others safe, but yeah, keep growing in that journey. And those are some of the leadership qualities that we try to embody as a whole agency, but individually on a daily basis. And in terms of more information, if you were interested in a career at the Environment Agency or within one of the DEFRA branches, as I say, there's 33 of them, so the options are endless. There's some information resources there that you might want to tap into. So that was a really quick whistle-stop tour, but I'm just conscious that for me, the most interesting bit is the discussion and the questions. So I just wanted to make sure that we've left enough time. So I hope that's useful.
Thank you so much, Kira. And what Rihanna popped into the chat, and I hope you don't mind, but if we could circulate your slides, it just means then that we've also got the opportunity to kind of follow up on some of those websites and things as well, if that's okay.
Of course, yeah, that's fine.
Oh, that's great, thank you. Yeah, thanks very much for that. I think one of the things that struck me in that conversation was about, in your values, you've got in that thing about the culture. We talked about partnership, being part of a team, having allies, and I mean, apart from that, they're really kind of intrinsic to our well-being anyway as a human. I think that the challenges we have as a planet, yeah, unless we're prepared to work with one another and unless we can join up our efforts, yeah, we're just not really going to make any difference. Well, we're not going to make the difference that we would like to. So yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing those thoughts. Okay, and thanks everybody for keeping to time, because I agree, Kira, it'd be great when we can actually then have a proper conversation at the end, which means that, yeah, hopefully we'll all get the chance to interact a bit more later. So thank you everybody for being respectful of that. So what I'd like to do now is hand over to Karen. Karen's our final speaker this evening, and she joins us from Cumbria Action for Sustainability, which you might be aware of or heard of as CAFS, because that's certainly how I think that's something that we're probably more used to hearing. So Karen, welcome. I'm glad you could be with us.
Thank you very much. It's great to be following such an amazing array of advice and experience. So I've been Chief Exec of CAFS for since December 2019. CAFS is a charity, which means that any surplus we make goes straight back into projects. Our vision is to secure a zero carbon Cumbria, which is socially, environmentally and economically beneficial for everyone. So to do that, we're developing and delivering projects all the time, which support individuals, communities, organisations of all kinds, and helping people to transition from high to low carbon living, because we need to radically and very quickly reduce Cumbria's carbon emissions. So just to give you a sort of some sense of the diversity of the projects that we get involved in, they range from things like promoting community-owned solar panels and electric vehicle charging points, to providing advice to a whole range of businesses, to helping householders reduce their energy use and make their homes warmer and more livable, to doing research on things like the potential for green jobs in Cumbria. We also often work with whole communities. So at the moment, and for some years now, we've been working with the community of Ambleside and a group of citizens there to help them figure out how to decarbonise the town. And we run just heaps and heaps of training and events to support this change that we need to make from high to low carbon. We have to win the funding for the projects that we run. So we're constantly applying for grants from trusts and foundations. And in the past 18 months, we've won over £3 million for projects in Cumbria, which I think we're very proud of. So we've been growing like Topsy. In June 2020, we had around 14 staff. Now we've got more than double that, and we continue to recruit pretty much every month. We're recruiting new roles, and we've done all of that virtually. And I think that's testament to the passion and the skills of the team. And it also shows the scale of demand for help on decarbonisation. There's a lot of momentum in Cumbria around this agenda. So as well as my chief exec role, I'm also co-chair of something called the Zero Carbon Cumbria Partnership, which involves around 80 organisations from local authorities, educational institutions, the health service, conservation organisations, you name it, they're on it. So lots and lots of different organisations in Cumbria all working together to plan the pathway to net zero. And that's a really interesting and challenging piece of work that we're doing. I also sit on a few boards like the Public Health Alliance and the Carlisle Partnership Executive. So my role as chief exec is pretty much all encompassing. I'm responsible overall for pretty much every aspect of our work, for ensuring that we deliver what we've been funded to deliver, that we're legally compliant, that we're financially viable, and that the staff, the most important asset that the organisation has, it's really important to ensure that they're enjoying their jobs and that they're able to do the best that they can in those roles. I report to a board of 8 trustees who are all volunteers. They all bring different skills and different amounts of time to spare, and they're great, and they do their best to support both me and CAFS. When it comes to trying to describe my career path, I wish I could say that I had my environmental career all planned out, but I absolutely didn't. I left university with a degree in biology. I had absolutely no clue what to do. So I went off and did a bit of teaching overseas, which was great. My first proper job was in publishing for Penguin Books, simply because I loved books. And it was a fantastic job, but there was a consistent nagging voice in my head, which was all about nature and environment, loving it and wanting to see it thrive. I wasn't getting satisfaction from my job at Penguin Books in that respect. So I went back to university and did a master's degree in natural resource management at Edinburgh. And then that was followed by some short-term research contracts for the Scottish Agricultural College. But I still didn't have a career plan. I was going for jobs that just basically caught my attention. So the biggest milestone in my career was when I got a job in the public sector for an organisation called English Nature, which is similar in structure to the Environment Agency. English Nature is now called Natural England. It's a non-departmental public body, sometimes called an arm's length body, which basically means it's an organisation that is entirely funded by government, by DEFRA, as is the Environment Agency, but it operates mostly independently from government. And the purpose of of Natural England is to protect the special nature and landscapes that we have in England, and to ensure people can access the countryside and enjoy the countryside for recreation. It has staff and offices all over the country. And once you're in the door of a big organisation like that, I found just lots of opportunities, as Kira has mentioned. You get lots of opportunities for training, and you can pick up those leadership and management experiences and skills. And there are lots of opportunities to apply for all different jobs and to relocate. So I had several different roles during my 12 years at Natural England, starting out as an agriculture policy officer, mostly working with the NFU and government on schemes to introduce biodiversity on farmland. I then managed some big projects all around communicating the wonders of wildlife to the general public. I had a spell working in marine conservation, running a campaign to raise public awareness of all the wonders of the undersea world around our coasts. And then I ended up in senior management, managing the organisation's external relations team. So on my journey through Natural England, I learned about project management, budget management, communications, stakeholder management, line management, team management, organisational target setting and performance reporting, psychology, and what I call interpersonal mush. That's the stuff that just sort of happens between people, between teams, that can really affect performance. So I benefited a huge amount from that career in the public sector. But in 2014, I left Natural England. I really wanted to do something closer to home. And I benefited from my networks. I had good networks. I had good connections. I knew people who knew me and how I worked. And it was as though they knew better than I did what I was capable of. And it was those contacts that encouraged me to apply for jobs in the voluntary sector, which I might never have considered myself for, including the one that I have now. So I had various kind of fairly senior roles in a few different charities, all working in the field of the environment, where I learned more about how the charity sector works. I learned more about how to communicate charitable causes and environmental causes, and also importantly, how to fundraise for environmental projects. How I got the role at CAFS was really by working for it. I spent many, many hours on my application. I researched the organisation. I talked to people who I knew who knew it. I thought about all the things that I'd done in my career that were relevant to this job at this time in this place. I thought about the questions that I would be asked in my interview. And the interview itself was a whole day of assessments with the 4 other candidates. I just thought it was a fascinating process, and I thoroughly enjoyed being challenged. And I just felt incredibly privileged, actually, when I was offered the role. So in terms of leadership when it comes to the environment and what you can do, well, you've heard some fantastic advice from all the previous speakers. I'm not sure how much I can add to it, but I think we all carry with us some incredibly powerful tools, which are our eyes, our ears, and our mouths. So with your eyes, it's about being alert to what's going on in the national news for sure, but also just more locally around you, with your networks, your family, with your friends. It's about not stopping being curious and being attentive and picking things up. With your ears, I think the media has changed hugely in the last 10 years. We are all now reporters through social media. So there is a lot of emphasis on broadcasting at the moment, on grabbing attention. But I would urge you also to be a good listener, to really pay attention to listening, to fully listen to people's concerns, to listen to where they're coming from, to try and understand their lives, their values, their priorities, because they may well be different from yours. So some people will be motivated by saving money, some people by reducing waste, some people want to know that their kids will be able to get a good job, some people want to breathe clean air, some people want to be able to cycle safely to work. And so when you've done that listening, and when you know what motivates people, you can really use that to help land your message. When it comes to your mouths, your voice, don't underestimate your personal power. And I don't mean power over people, I mean power to inspire people. So share what you're doing in your life to reduce your carbon emissions. If you're cycling instead of driving, if you're turning the heating down, if you're changing your diet to reduce your consumption of meat, maybe you've pledged yourself not to fly for a couple of years. Talk about that in your networks, and share the challenges of doing those things too. Ask questions of your college or your employer about what action they're taking on the environment. Share your own sources of inspiration. And it's really important, and it's something that CAFS does a lot, is to accentuate the positives, accentuate all the benefits of decarbonising, the clean air, the saving money, the healthier diets, the warmer homes, paint a picture for people of all the good outcomes of changing behaviours. When it comes to kind of top tips around leadership, sort of more generally, I think the best thing I've personally learned on my journey is how to deal with my own self-doubt. I used to think that my self-doubt meant I couldn't be good in my job. But then I read that the best leaders are the ones that actually have self-doubt. So now I channel that and I acknowledge that it can be useful. It means that I prepare. It means I don't make assumptions, that I know the answers. It means that I research, that I invite others to contribute, that I acknowledge others' views, and that I kind of welcome challenges to my ideas and opinions. So from thinking that was a weakness, I can now accept that it actually has benefits in the way that I do my job. The other thing that I do is ask for help. I've had several mentors, particularly over the last 8 years. It's often possible to find someone experienced, someone who has a different perhaps skill set to yours, who would be very happy to support you. Mentoring can be a really rewarding thing to do for the mentor as well as the mentee. And I exploit my friends for their skills. I have a friend who used to run global marketing for Sony. So I sent him my CV when I was leaving Natural England, and he absolutely ripped it to shreds, along with my application forms for various jobs. And his advice has made a huge difference to my success rate for interviews, because he taught me how to value and sell myself. And that's not something that comes naturally to quite a lot of people, selling yourself. I think other tips I would give you is to think about being a volunteer for a trustee for a charity in the environmental sector. Many charities are crying out for younger trustees to get that youth voice, to help us develop the right strategies for future generations. And in doing that kind of role, you could learn a huge amount about leadership, about governance, about operations. You could make some really great connections. You could be ensuring that your voice is heard for the future, and it would also look great on your CV. And a final sort of little appeal I'd like to make, really, when you're seeing jobs that you would like, I would really emphasize the importance of getting yourself into that interview. You need to get in the door to meet the people who are recruiting. And to do that, you really do have to sell yourself. And that can feel uncomfortable. So I would just urge you to bite the bullet and don't be bashful. Put yourself in my place. I've done huge amounts of recruitment over the years of my career. I might be sifting through 20 or 30 applications for one role, and I've got very limited time to choose the interviewees. So you need to really make sure your CV or your job application reflects the person specification for the role, so that someone like me, who's a bit stressed and a bit tight for time, can look at your application and can just tick off all the keywords in the job description. That's pretty much what it comes down to. But also you do need to show in your application that you are invested and that you've put effort into applying. I can tell at a glance when an application has been dashed off on spec and that person won't get an interview. So do your work, do your homework. It does take time and you need to make that space and time, but ask a mentor to look at your CV or your application. And when you get the interview, because you will get the interview, study for it, prepare for it, and get someone experienced to do a dummy interview with you. I'm going to stop there, and hopefully that was useful, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you very much. And a couple of comments in the chat while you were talking. So much good advice. And yes, hopefully we've made some connections for the young people on the call about how they can access somebody like a mentor, because yeah, completely agree. Thank you all. So yes, now we have time for questions. So unfortunately, Neve's just had to drop off the call, which is a shame. But yeah, who else would have a question for any of our speakers? It might be a general question, or it might be that you want to ask a question directly to one of the speakers. Please feel free to take yourself off mute if you're just happy to ask your question. You could also pop it in the chat if you're not feeling that you want to say it out loud, whatever you prefer.
I think this has been touched on a little bit, but I was wondering if anyone wanted to talk more about how they kind of keep confident that, you know, we can make a change, and how you can like not become overwhelmed by what's happening, because that's something that I struggle with.
Oh, that's such a great question, Claire. And you can see by the nods that's resonating with everybody. Yeah. Who would like? Sarah? Yeah, would you like to respond? And Kira, you too. Yeah, Sarah.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's actually a brilliant question. You're absolutely right. You know, we've got these huge global problems, and they're really complex and they're really overwhelming. And you think, well, what on earth difference can I make? In fact, what difference can our country make when China is still building coal-fired powered plants and all of this stuff? And I think the answer is to come down to the local. Think about what's going on in your local area. And I love the work that Karen's doing, for example. You know, think about how these issues will affect the area that you know, and then you campaign and get involved with that. So, you know, if you can see your community is subjected to flooding, well, how can you help your community then become more resilient to that? How can you encourage people to engage with that as an issue? If you can see climate change is affecting, for example, a woodland that you really like because the trees are getting too dry or getting ash dieback or something, you know, campaign and get involved with protecting those trees that are local to you, and then you'll see the difference that you're making, and you'll be able to bring other people involved into that campaign. And just remember that you're not alone, because there's so many people like you that are passionate and want to do something. And if you can then start to connect with them, you'll realize that your voice is part of this much bigger voice, and actually you're part of a movement, and things are really changing. And I think that's one of the most empowering things we can do. So think global, but act local. And I think that used to be an old saying, and I'll bring it back. I'll hand over to Karen.
Yeah, Karen, do you want to speak? Kira, I think you were keen to speak as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, Kira, do you want to go first?
I would, Sarah, yeah, I absolutely agree. Thinking local, but also that can have a ripple effect. You don't know where that might end. You could start something really small and it have that, you know, much bigger ripple effect, which is always an added bonus. Quick wins is what I keep going back to, whether it's for environmental things or just tackling the day. If you can just have a little quick win, it could be such a motivator. So just try to do that.
Thanks, Kira. Karen, what would you add?
Yeah.
Oh,
I accidentally muted myself. Yeah, I think that question was really heartfelt, and I know exactly how that feels. So last year when COP26 was happening and it was just sort of bad news, loads of bad news, I was finding my attention, I was finding it really hard to focus on my job. And I spoke to my mentor about this actually, and she did a really great little exercise with me, which I do occasionally still do. She got me to draw a circle on a piece of paper, and she got me to write on the piece of paper all the things that were just sort of dragging me down, that were outside my circle of control. So all the things that went on the outside of the circle, things like China building coal power stations, the fact there might be a new coal mine in Cumbria, all of that stuff went on the outside of the circle. And she said, right, now focus on what's within your circle of control. What can you actually do on a day-to-day basis? And it just, I don't know how it worked really, but it just released me from that sort of really nagging, dragging down that was happening for all those things that actually I really don't have control over. And I think the other thing that really helps is just that there are so many positive things happening, particularly in Cumbria. There is a huge amount of momentum and people engaged and interested, and communities and new people coming to understand the crisis that we're facing and actually starting to take action. So I would just say also look for those positive stories and really celebrate them.
Thanks, Karen, and thank you for such a brilliant question, Claire. And hopefully what you've got there is not just one idea, but several. Next question from anybody?
I have one, if any of our other attendees want to ask first, but I can chip in if not.
Yeah, go for it, Rihanna.
I think obviously tourism is such a massive industry within Cumbria, and it's important that we obviously dedicate, it's such an important factor in the local economy. But then we've seen through the pandemic, when this idea of staycation came to light, obviously when people couldn't fly, but it did lead to such an increase in sort of traffic and visitors and cars, which obviously leads to carbon emissions. How can we sort of, so similar to what Kira said, find a mutually beneficial solution to that? So make sure it's sort of environmentally friendly tourism. No, it's a difficult question, but interested to hear your ideas.
Shall I go on that one?
Yeah, please, Karen.
Yeah, I mean, it is huge, isn't it? Because any one day in the Lake District, something like 42,000 people live in the Lake District, and around 42,000 people will be visiting. So you're kind of doubling the population. Our approach is really to work with the local communities, because if we can get it right for local communities, then the tourism sector will also benefit, the visitors will also benefit. So if we can improve the options for active travel, make cycleways safer, encourage that kind of slow travel, so people have more options for getting about on foot. That benefits the local economy, because when people are walking or cycling, traveling slower, then the research shows that they are much more likely to spend more money in the local shops. The public transport network obviously clearly needs to be improved. There's electric vehicles, which will be increasing in number significantly when the petrol and diesel ban on cars comes in 2030. So we're very keen to support community owned and accessible charge points, because not everybody can have one at their home. And we've done some research looking at the growth in charge points needed in order to meet the demand from both residents and visitors. So there is a whole host of stuff that needs to happen. And if we can get it right for local communities, it will also benefit all of those visitors coming as well.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, Elspeth, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, because a lot of our clients increasingly are hospitality. From the Lake District, a lot of hotels and all of those areas that feed into that, the whole supply chain of hospitality. And it's so interesting that, to take it back to the leadership, there's key leaders in all of those businesses, whether it's just like a business manager or someone who runs like a laundry service, which then is part of a massive part of the carbon footprint of a hotel chain, for example, who are making all of those individual little changes for tourism in Cumbria. There's some incredible innovation as well that I've heard, which is, this is kind of linked, if not directly linked. There's research at the moment, which I think is so fascinating. There's a lot of couples who want their weddings in Cumbria, and that's a massive part of our tourism. There's some research at the moment using like couples using VR headsets, so they don't have to travel up in their cars, they don't have to bring all the traffic all the way up to the Lake District to visit just to go back to where they're from. They can have a virtual experience, view venues virtually, and then make decisions and only make one trip, one travel. Hotels, like Karen was just saying, the investment in EV like charge points, we're seeing a lot of like love from that from the hotel industry, them hoping that they can rent cars, electric cars out to guests, etc. There's so much innovation in the hospitality space, and if you're interested in that, there's so much in Cumbria that I'm sure you could find on LinkedIn. It's probably a great place to look.
Thanks, Elspeth. And yeah, great that innovation's being used, and that's the kind of thing that actually hooks people in as well. You know, if there's if that new technology and to do something new or different, I think that's a really good combination and a real influencer. Something we were talking about before. You know, how do we communicate? How do we influence and tap into what's important to people to kind of communicate that message? Thank you. I've also got a question, but I don't want to hold the thing. So please, if anybody else has a question, or if any of our panel have a question for the audience, I don't know if you've got something that you would like to take the opportunity to ask other people on the call. Karen?
Yeah, I'd just be very curious to know from our attendees just what sort of career advice is coming through schools and colleges in relation to what we've been talking about. Do you feel like you're getting the kind of options and ideas through school careers hubs that you need to sort of make your plans for your careers?
Anybody like to answer that?
I would say there is some. I recently had an opportunity to do some work experience that was looking at sustainable design, and I got that opportunity through school. But one thing that I've definitely found is that growing up, I've heard like, oh, you're interested in the environment, that's great, all the jobs are going to be in the environment in the future, everything's going to be about the environment, but then it doesn't always seem that way. And I've been trying to look into doing like bachelor's level apprenticeships in the environment in Cumbria, and everyone says, oh no, you can't do that, they're only for graduates. And like just looking at university courses, Oxford and Cambridge don't have anything that linked to the environment. I think they have natural sciences, but nothing specifically like environmental science. So I've been left feeling a little bit confused because I've grown up being told that it's the future and that everything's going to be about the environment. But now that I'm looking for the next stage in my educational path, I'm struggling to find like as many things as I was like given the indication that there would be.
Thanks, Claire. That's really interesting, isn't it? That there's this idea that there would be, and then yes, in that time frame, they haven't emerged in the way that it was perhaps hoped. Yeah, I don't know if any of our panel or anybody else on the call. Yeah, Sarah, you might have some ideas as to other routes.
Well, it's really interesting that you say that, Claire, because, you know, as I said, when I first started, there was like 2 undergraduate degrees in the whole of the UK. And I kind of assumed that there was an awful lot more around now, but really interested to hear that Oxbridge are still not doing that. But I think it was, now I can't remember who it was that said this, but one of our speakers was talking about how you can get involved with the environment and sustainability through other areas. And I think you mentioned fashion. I think it was you, Heather. It was mentioning fashion, and you've got construction and all of this. And I would say, you know, in addition to the environment, or which part of the environment are you really interested in? Because one of the options might be to look at a degree that kind of brings that overlap together. So, for example, if you were interested in a degree in art, for argument's sake, you were looking at a degree that had sustainability as a subject threaded through it. Or if you're interested in chemistry or maths, that sustainability was a really key, strong theme through that topic. And that might be another way in. And then what you're doing, instead of taking perhaps a general degree, which mine was, we covered biology, politics, economics, environmental issues, marketing, we covered all sorts of things. Instead of taking sort of a general degree, you're quite early on starting to specialise into something, because while we absolutely need people who have got an energy and experience and skills in the environment, actually we also need specialist skills that can come in and solve particular problems. So it might be worth trying to think about where your interest within the environment is, and then kind of going in that way. Just a thought.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, it's a bit like turn that on its head a little bit and potentially look at it in a different way. Any further questions? Just open to anybody. No? Oh, maybe I get the opportunity to ask one of my questions then, if that's all right. So just, I suppose it's picking up on something, Heather, you said early on when I was listening to your role within the construction industry in such a large organisation. You know, of those 750 people who were employed by Eric Wright Group, I'm sure not all of them potentially agree with some of the environmental measures they've got to take. Yeah, so maybe just, I don't know, two key things that help you to convince or influence them.
I think I would say trying to tailor your message to them is very important. So I can sit there and talk about all the high level things like COP, about, you know, how much carbon we're pumping into the atmosphere and all that sort of thing. But for, you know, our labourers who are working, bricklayers, they're not going to understand that. So it's about being able to tailor the message to them and how it can influence them, and what, you know, small actions they can take, you know, to actually try and reduce our carbon footprint. So for the guys on the ground, we're much more focused on, you know, thinking about their behaviour and their habits, you know, things like, you know, not having the heating on and the windows open in the site cabins, things like that. But really trying to tailor the message to them and put it into language that they'll understand, not, you know, talking at this really high level stuff. That sort of helps to sort of bring them around, because they can see how it relates to them and how they can actually make a difference. I'd say that's one of the key things. And then, yeah, just trying to keep this sort of consistent message going. So we have, you know, we've got the logo for net zero, so we try and put that on all of our communications and documents, just to keep the same message consistent all the time. So that people, like, they're always hearing the same thing, so eventually they sort of come around to your way of thinking. And yeah, a lot of, you know, yeah, persuasion and trying to sort of win people around, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And those things, I think, when we're trying to create any change, it's the consistency, isn't it?
Absolutely,
it's that drip of those messages. And absolutely tailoring it to it. And I think a couple of you or more, I think all of you touched on that importance of listening. And if you can understand a bit more about that other person, it does help us to then, change or tailor our communication. Yeah.
I think in terms of putting messages out there about the environment and all the many issues, it is really important to make it accessible, because it's so bamboozling. You know, climate change is so complex and it just turns people off. So it's really, you know, what we try to do, part of my role, is try to simplify the language that we use. And it's absolutely not about dumbing down, but it's just trying to make the information accessible.
Yeah, thanks, Kira. Yeah, and again, really important. And being accessible means everybody gets involved in the conversation, which is absolutely what we want as well.
Of course.
Can I say one last thing as well? We often hear about, there's lots of disagreement about what you should do and what's going on and what's important. And if you listen to the news, you think nobody really knows and nobody really knows what to do or what's happening. But there's been so much agreement in the room tonight. You know, we're all coming from our different directions, but actually there's some really strong messages that are coming through that actually we all share. And I think actually that's really important. And I think that much better reflects the reality of the conversations that actually people are having out there now. You know, we know this stuff is happening. We know we've got to do something. It's about what we can do now and how we can get on with it. And I know the guys here are doing that, and that's just fantastic.
Completely agree. It is fantastic. And yeah, I certainly feel far more hopeful, you know, because I think your point, Claire, your question, you know, what happens when you feel overwhelmed? So yeah, I do feel a lot more hopeful. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate the time that you've taken, both our speakers, but also to the audience as well. Thank you for taking time this evening to join us. There is the opportunity to watch again, because it will go onto our website, and then also the additional resources. Kira, I know you said that you'd be happy to share your slides, so just really appreciate it, everything that's been said, and very much enjoyed it. Thank you, everybody.